Have you ever left a conversation feeling completely drained, as if something invisible had siphoned away your energy? Perhaps you've experienced that peculiar heaviness after spending time with certain people, a sensation that lingers long after they've gone. If you're nodding in recognition, you're not alone. This energetic vulnerability is especially common among sensitive individuals who often describe themselves as emotional sponges, absorbing the psychological states of those around them. This phenomenon, this energetic exchange between people, was something Carl Jung understood deeply, though he conceptualized it through a different framework than we might today. Jung, the revolutionary Swiss psychiatrist who broke from Freudian tradition to forge his own analytical psychology, didn't simply theorize about the human psyche. He developed practical methods for psychological protection that remain remarkably relevant today. When we speak of toxic energy in psychological terms, we're referring to the harmful emotional and psychological effects that can be transmitted through human interaction. Jung wouldn't have used this modern terminology, but he extensively explored how unconscious psychological material could be projected between people, creating destructive patterns of interaction. He understood that we don't merely exchange words and explicit meanings with others. We also engage in a complex dance of unconscious forces, archetypes, and psychological energies. What makes Jung's approach so valuable, particularly for sensitive people, is that it acknowledges the reality of psychological vulnerability without pathologizing it. In fact, Jung saw sensitivity not as a weakness to be overcome, but as a potential gift that requires proper management. His methods don't ask you to become someone else. Rather, they help you develop the psychological tools to navigate the world as your authentic self while maintaining healthy boundaries. Today, I'll share Jung's comprehensive approach to psychological protection, a sophisticated system that goes far beyond the simplistic advice to shield yourself or cut cords. We'll explore Jung's nuanced understanding of the psyche and reveal practical techniques derived from his work that can help you maintain your sensitivity while protecting yourself from psychological depletion. This isn't about quick fixes. It's about developing a robust psychological framework that transforms your relationship with yourself and others. To grasp Jung's approach to psychological protection, we must first understand his conception of psychic energy. Jung used the term libido not in the limited Freudian sense of sexual energy, but as a broader concept representing the totality of psychological energy available to an individual. He believed this energy could be invested in various aspects of life, relationships, work, creative pursuits, and that its flow and distribution significantly impacted psychological health. For Jung, the exchange of energy between people wasn't merely metaphorical, but represented genuine psychological processes. When we interact with others, we engage in complex patterns of projection, introjection, and transference that can either enrich or deplete our psychological resources. Jung observed that these exchanges often occurred unconsciously, with individuals unaware of how they were being influenced by or influencing others. Psychological boundaries, from a Jungian perspective, are not rigid walls but permeable membranes that regulate this energetic exchange. They determine what we allow into our psychological space and what we keep out. The ability to maintain healthy boundaries stems from a well-developed sense of self, what Jung termed the ego, that can differentiate between one's own psychological material and that of others. Without this differentiation, we become vulnerable to psychological invasion and depletion. Central to Jung's psychology is the concept of the collective unconscious, a shared repository of archetypal images, symbols, and patterns that transcend individual experience. This collective dimension of the psyche connects us all at a deep level, which explains why sensitive people may perceive energetic influences that others miss. Those with heightened sensitivity often have more permeable access to this collective dimension, making them more receptive to archetypal energies, but also more vulnerable to psychological contagion. Jung's distinction between introversion and extroversion offers another valuable lens for understanding energy management. Introverts, according to Jung, direct their energy primarily inward toward their internal world of ideas and reflections, while extroverts direct energy outward toward people and external activities. Neither orientation is superior, but each requires different strategies for energy conservation and renewal. Introverts typically need solitude to recharge, while extroverts often replenish their energy through social interaction. Recognizing your natural orientation can help you develop appropriate strategies for psychological protection. These Jungian concepts find striking parallels in modern understandings of highly sensitive people, HSPs, and empaths. What contemporary psychology describes as sensory processing sensitivity, an increased responsiveness to environmental stimuli and emotional cues, aligns with Jung's observations about individuals with heightened psychological permeability. Jung might have viewed today's empaths as people with particular access to the collective unconscious and archetypal energies, making them valuable bridges between conscious and unconscious realms while also requiring special attention to psychological boundaries. That Jung's framework offers validation for sensitive individuals who often feel overwhelmed in a culture that tends to value extrovert qualities. Rather than seeing sensitivity as a flaw to overcome, Jung's approach encourages us to honor our natural temperament while developing the psychological tools to navigate the world effectively. This perspective shifts the focus from changing who you are to better managing your unique gifts. At the heart of Jung's psychological system lies the concept of the shadow, perhaps his most profound contribution to our understanding of psychological vulnerability. The shadow represents those aspects of ourselves that we deny, repress, or refuse to acknowledge. It contains qualities, impulses, and tendencies that contradict our conscious self-image or violate social norms. Far from being merely negative, the shadow contains valuable energies and potentials that, when integrated, can enrich our lives. However, when left unexamined, the shadow becomes the primary gateway through which toxic energy enters our psychological system. Jung observed that unrecognized shadow elements create specific vulnerabilities to external influences. When we deny certain qualities in ourselves, anger, jealousy, neediness, power hunger, we become hypersensitive to these same qualities in others. This hypersensitivity isn't random. It's a direct result of our refusal to acknowledge these aspects within ourselves. As Jung famously noted, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This irritation often signals a shadow projection at work. The mechanism of projection represents one of the primary ways toxic interactions develop between people. Projection occurs when we unconsciously attribute our own unacknowledged qualities to others. For example, if I repress my own aggressive impulses and consider myself always nice, I may become hyper-aware of and disturbed by others' aggression. This projection creates a distorted perception where I'm constantly reacting not to others as they truly are, but to disown parts of myself that I see reflected in them. Jung wrote extensively about recognizing projections as a crucial step in psychological protection. In his collected works, he notes that projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. The key insight here is that our strongest emotional reactions to others, whether positive or negative, often reveal more about our unconscious material than about the other person. By learning to identify when we're projecting, we can begin to withdraw these projections and see both ourselves and others more clearly. This is where shadow work becomes essential for building psychological resilience. Shadow work involves the deliberate process of bringing unconscious material into consciousness, acknowledging the full spectrum of our human nature rather than identifying only with our most acceptable qualities. As Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The practical process of shadow integration involves several steps. First, pay attention to your emotional triggers, those moments when your reaction seems disproportionate to the situation. These triggers often point to shadow elements. Second, practice honest self-reflection. asking what qualities you most deplore in others and considering how these might exist within yourself. Third, work with dreams, creative expression, and active imagination to access shadow content symbolically. Finally, develop compassion for the disowned parts of yourself, understanding that wholeness requires embracing your full humanity. As you integrate shadow elements, something remarkable happens. You become less susceptible to toxic energy from others. When someone projects their unconscious material onto you, you can recognize it as their projection rather than absorbing it as truth. When you encounter genuinely difficult people, you can interact with them without being psychologically invaded because you've already acknowledged and made peace with similar qualities within yourself. This is why shadow work forms the foundation of Jung's approach to psychological protection. It's not about creating barriers against others, but about becoming more whole within yourself. The more conscious you are of your own psychological material, the less vulnerable you are to unconscious influences from others. As Jung put it, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Jung developed several practical methods for psychological protection, with active imagination standing as one of his most powerful techniques. Unlike passive daydreaming, active imagination is a structured approach to engaging with unconscious content. It involves entering a meditative state and allowing images and scenarios to arise spontaneously while maintaining conscious awareness. Through this practice, Jung discovered that unconscious content could be accessed, dialogued with, and integrated, creating greater psychological coherence and resilience. As a protective practice, active imagination allows you to create symbolic representations of psychological boundaries. Jung encouraged his patients to visualize protective symbols, a circle of light, a shield, a sacred grove, and to engage with these images actively. Rather than just picturing them statically, he suggested entering into dialogue with these protective symbols, asking what they need to be strengthened or how they can better serve you. This approach recognizes that effective psychological protection isn't imposed from outside, but emerges organically from your own psyche. Jung's approach to creating psychological boundaries differs significantly from many contemporary techniques. Rather than emphasizing rigid barriers between self and others, Jung advocated for conscious discernment, the ability to distinguish between what belongs to you psychologically and what belongs to others. This discernment develops through ongoing self-reflection and the gradual integration of unconscious material. As Jung noted, where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling. This integration creates natural boundaries that don't require constant vigilance to maintain. The concept of individuation lies at the core of Jung's protective methodology. Individuation refers to the lifelong process of psychological development toward wholeness, becoming more fully yourself rather than conforming to external expectations. As you progress in this journey, you naturally become less susceptible to toxic influences because your sense of self is grounded in your own authentic nature rather than in others' approval or disapproval. Jung believed that the more individuated a person becomes, the less they are affected by unconscious collective forces and projections. For energy conservation and renewal, Jung emphasized the importance of balancing opposing psychological functions. He identified 4 primary functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition, and observed that most people naturally favor certain functions while neglecting others. Psychological depletion often occurs when we overuse our dominant functions without developing the complementary ones. For instance, someone who relies heavily on logical thinking may become depleted when forced to engage extensively with emotional content. Jung recommended developing all 4 functions for greater psychological resilience and energy management. Jung's symbolic visualization techniques for protection draw on archetypal imagery from various cultural traditions. He noted that certain protective symbols appear consistently across cultures: the circle, the temple, the wise guide, the protective animal. When working with clients who felt psychologically vulnerable, Jung often encouraged them to discover their personal protective symbols through dream work and active imagination. One patient might find protection in visualizing themselves surrounded by a sphere of golden light, while another might imagine a wise inner figure who offers guidance and support. The effectiveness of these visualizations stems not from their objective power, but from their resonance with the individual's unique psyche. Jung also recognized the power of ritual in maintaining psychological boundaries. Simple daily practices, lighting a candle to mark the transition from work to personal time, creating a dedicated space for reflection, or performing a brief ceremony before entering challenging situations, can help reinforce psychological boundaries. These rituals need not be elaborate. Their power lies in their symbolic significance and in the conscious intention behind them. Through these various approaches, active imagination, conscious discernment, individuation, balanced function development, symbolic visualization, and ritual, Jung offered a comprehensive system for psychological protection that respects individual differences while providing practical tools for navigating complex human interactions. For sensitive individuals, Jung's methods require thoughtful adaptation to address their unique challenges. Here's a step-by-step approach to implementing Jung's protective techniques, tailored specifically for those with heightened sensitivity. Begin with a shadow inventory exercise designed to identify points of vulnerability. In a private journal, answer these questions honestly. What qualities in others most disturb you? When do you feel most depleted after social interactions? What criticisms wound you most deeply? Jung would suggest that these answers reveal not just external threats, but internal points of integration needed for greater resilience. Spend 15 to 20 minutes with this exercise, writing without censoring yourself. Next, develop a personalized boundary visualization based on Jungian principles. Unlike standardized shield visualizations popular today, Jung would recommend discovering imagery that resonates with your unique psyche. Sit quietly, close your eyes, and ask your unconscious to show you an image that represents perfect protection for your particular sensitivity. Notice what spontaneously appears. Whether it's a rose garden with a gate, a translucent bubble, or something entirely unexpected, this image carries special significance for you. Practice visualizing this protective image daily, especially before entering challenging situations. For highly sensitive people, Jung's active imagination technique can be modified to address specific sensitivities. If you're particularly vulnerable to others' emotional states, try this adaptation. Visualize yourself sitting beside a stream. When you feel overwhelmed by absorbed emotions, imagine placing each foreign feeling into the stream and watching it flow away. Ask your unconscious to show you which emotions belong to you and which belong to others. Jung believed this sort of symbolic differentiation helps the psyche naturally develop appropriate boundaries. Journaling serves as a powerful Jungian tool for boundary setting. Consider these Jung-inspired prompts. If my boundaries could speak, what would they say they need? Draw a circle and write inside it what genuinely belongs to you. Write outside it what doesn't. Describe a situation where you felt depleted and dialogue with that depletion as if it were a character. Ask what it needs. Jung found that such active engagement with psychological material strengthens natural boundaries more effectively than intellectual understanding alone. Environmental modifications based on Jungian principles can significantly support sensitive people. Jung recognized that our physical spaces reflect and influence our psychological state. Create a dedicated sanctuary space in your home, however small, that symbolizes psychological safety. Jung would suggest personalizing the space with objects that hold symbolic protective meaning for you, perhaps stones, images, or other items that intuitively feel strengthening. Use this space for daily centering practices. Meditation techniques derived from Jung's active imagination offer specialized support for sensitive people. Try this Jung-inspired meditation. Sit comfortably and imagine descending a staircase into your inner world. At the bottom, find a door that leads to your inner sanctuary. Inside, Meet a figure who represents your wise inner protector. Ask this figure for specific guidance on managing your sensitivity. Jung believed that such inner figures often provide precisely the wisdom we need, but cannot access through intellectual means alone. For managing real-time sensitivity in challenging situations, Jung would recommend the technique of conscious differentiation. When feeling overwhelmed, mentally step back and ask, is this my feeling or someone else's? Is this reaction coming from my present adult self or from an unhealed past part? This conscious questioning creates psychological space that prevents automatic absorption of other states. Practice this technique daily in progressively more challenging situations. Jung also emphasized the importance of symbolic rituals for sensitive people. Develop a brief, cleansing ritual to use after depleting interactions, perhaps washing your hands while visualizing psychological residue being cleared away, or changing clothes as a symbolic act of releasing absorbed energy. The physical action paired with conscious intention creates a powerful psychological boundary that particularly benefits sensitive individuals. These practical applications honor Jung's depth psychological approach while providing concrete techniques for those with heightened sensitivity. Rather than attempting to eliminate sensitivity, which Jung would view as psychologically harmful, these methods help channel and protect this valuable trait while preventing depletion. Applying Jung's methods in challenging relationships requires consistent practice and realistic expectations. Begin by identifying your most depleting relationships and categorizing them according to the specific shadow elements they activate. For instance, a critical colleague might trigger your fear of inadequacy, while a needy friend might activate your repressed resentment about caretaking. Jung would suggest approaching each relationship with awareness of these specific triggers rather than with a generic protective strategy. For unavoidable difficult relationships, Jung advocated what he called conscious suffering, acknowledging the challenge without either denying it or being consumed by it. Before interactions with depleting individuals, prepare yourself by briefly acknowledging the specific shadow element likely to be activated. During the interaction, practice inner witnessing, observing your reactions without immediately acting on them. Afterward, use active imagination to dialogue with any activated shadow elements. This approach transforms difficult relationships from purely depleting experiences into opportunities for integration that you'll know Jung's techniques are working when you notice several key shifts. First, your emotional reactions to difficult people become less intense and recovery occurs more quickly. Second, you find yourself less preoccupied with others' opinions and behaviors. Third, you experience greater energy stability throughout the day, without dramatic swings from energized to depleted. Fourth, your dreams may reflect this integration through symbols of strengthening, protection, or newly discovered runes or spaces, all Jungian indicators of psychological expansion and boundary development. Common obstacles in implementing these techniques include inconsistent practice, perfectionism, and a natural resistance of the psyche to change. Jung recognized that psychological growth occurs in a spiral pattern rather than linearly. We revisit similar issues at deeper levels. When you encounter setbacks, Jung would recommend viewing them with curiosity rather than judgment. Ask what the setback might be communicating about areas needing attention. Remember that Jung himself emphasized the ongoing nature of psychological development, noting that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Successful implementation can be seen in numerous case examples. Consider Sarah, a highly sensitive therapist who struggled with absorbing clients' emotional states. By developing a personalized boundary visualization, in her case, imagining roots growing from her feet into the earth, and practicing it consistently between sessions, she reported a 70% reduction in emotional depletion. Or Michael, an empathic manager overwhelmed by workplace dynamics, who used Jung's active imagination to dialogue with his people-pleasing tendency. This process revealed childhood origins of his pattern and allowed him to develop more authentic leadership boundaries. For daily practice, Jung would recommend a rhythm rather than rigid routine. Begin each day with a brief centering practice, perhaps 5 minutes of connecting with your personal boundary visualization. Throughout the day, practice moment-to-moment awareness of energy shifts, noting when you feel depleted and pausing to reset your boundaries. End each day with reflection, perhaps through journaling or active imagination, to process any challenging interactions and release absorbed energies. Jung emphasized that consistency matters more than duration. Brief, regular practice creates more substantial change than occasional lengthy sessions. Remember that Jung viewed psychological protection not as isolation, but as healthy regulation of energy exchange. The goal isn't to become impervious to others, but to engage authentically while maintaining your psychological integrity. As you integrate these practices, you'll likely find yourself more genuinely connected to others precisely because you're less depleted by them, a paradox Jung would appreciate. Throughout this exploration of Carl Jung's approach to psychological protection, we've uncovered a sophisticated system that goes far beyond simplistic notions of blocking negative energy. Jung's methods honor the complexity of human psychology while offering practical tools for managing sensitivity in a challenging world. The key elements of Jung's approach can be summarized as follows. First, understanding the role of the shadow in creating specific vulnerabilities to external influences. Second, developing conscious discernment between what belongs to you psychologically and what belongs to others. Third, engaging in active imagination to create personalized protective imagery and dialogues. Fourth, pursuing the process of individuation as the ultimate foundation for psychological resilience. And finally, implementing daily practices that reinforce healthy boundaries while honoring your natural sensitivity. What makes these methods particularly valuable for sensitive people is that they don't pathologize sensitivity or attempt to eliminate it. Instead, Jung's approach recognizes heightened sensitivity as a potentially valuable trait that requires proper management. Unlike approaches that treat sensitivity as a weakness to overcome, Jung's methods help channel this trait constructively while preventing the depletion that often accompanies IT as you implement these techniques. Remember that psychological growth is an ongoing journey rather than a destination. There will be moments of breakthrough and periods of challenge, but each experience offers an opportunity for greater integration and resilience. The goal isn't perfection, but progress. Becoming increasingly conscious of your psychological patterns and increasingly skillful in managing your energy. I'll leave you with one of Jung's most profound insights about psychological strength. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. This statement captures the essence of Jung's approach to psychological protection, not as victimhood or passive defense, but as active engagement with your own development. By working consciously with your sensitivity rather than against it, you can transform what might have been a vulnerability into a source of wisdom and strength. The most powerful boundary isn't a wall, but a well-developed sense of self. As you continue this journey of psychological development, may you discover not just protection from toxic influences, but a deeper connection to your own authentic nature, the true gift of Jung's remarkable work.